you got to win this weekend. You want the most upside. I think it is Wicks. But if you're looking, hey, I've got a spot where I might need somebody for 3 weeks, I do think I would lean Adonai Mitchell.
Nico Collins, Dwayne, because for the second week in a row, had a long touchdown taken off the board.
This was his best utilization game of the season.
And then Terry freaking McLaurin all the way down there at number 4 on his own team, Dwayne. Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. I am your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, and it's a great day to break down all of the utilization and a little bit of sheesh goodness ahead of week 13. Only 2 more weeks before we get to those fantasy playoffs. Now or never, let's get those rosters in the right spot. And to help us do just that, it's the one, the only, Dwayne "The Rock" McFarland. Mr. Dwayne, happy week 13.
Happy week 13, Ian. I mean, we got to watch 2 brothers face off last night. Sometimes I feel we hang out so much, I feel like you're my little brother. So, I mean, I have to imagine that, you know, if we were coaching 2 teams, I would also have dominated you 3 times. It would be 3-0, my teams versus your teams. I am getting an Xbox. I'm getting an Xbox for Christmas. I'm going to make you play me in college football. And I think I'm going to play you like cold. Like I won't have played at all. I won't know what any of the buttons are. That will definitely let you win the first game.
I'm going to just overlook and be the bigger man, the 3 or 4 slights you've already thrown at me to start the show. I was watching the Manning cast, though, Dwayne. Did you know that Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson were brothers?
Yes.
I had no idea. They look nothing alike.
Yeah. It's just the nose. The nose kind of gives it away. Hair color does not. No, yeah. Whenever I was growing up still, Ian, you know, I'm old now, but whenever I was a young guy, like those were 2 up and coming actors. So yeah, I knew that they were brothers.
I'm a big fan of, Wedding Crashers, old school, all that, but somehow I overlooked that. But no longer fun vibes as always on the Manning cast. Even had Bill Belichick out there printing off his email notes, talking about questions that he would be receiving on the Manning cast. So, I will worry about beating Dwayne's behind in, NCAA football here in a few short months. But first of all, we need to break down that Monday Night Football action. And yes, it was John Harbaugh and the Ravens taking it to Jim and the Chargers once again, 30-23. And Dwayne once again saw some really nice performances from Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, albeit Henry's 12-game touchdown streak was snapped because Sheesh had that 5-yard touchdown nullified.
Yeah, look, Derrick Henry's going to Derrick Henry. It's pretty inevitable at this point. He does occasionally get game scripted out of things whenever they go to this pass heavy mode. But yeah, like it's the Ravens. Great offense, great running back. Great scheme. I mean, what is there not to like about Derrick Henry? So he's a smash. The interesting part with Lamar, right, is just like the diversity that we talk about. It doesn't matter how the game script goes for this guy. Oh, you want to tone it down? Great. He's just going to take off and run. And that's really what he did last night. Still gave you 22.6 fantasy points despite only throwing for 177. And if you look at the month prior to that, like he was doing it through the air, 281, 289, 280, 290 yards passing, giving you huge fantasy points. The last 2 weeks around the 200 mark, still getting it done because of how diverse his game is. And he can always he could throw up 100 on you at any time and a rushing touchdown. The only player in the NFL, right, that can really do the things that he does. I know we have a lot of other dual threat guys, but he is the one true guy that could run for 100 yards and throw for 300 in the same game on you in 1 week. Like he's the most likely to do that.
Again, just another incredible performance in a season with many of them. Maybe we'll see that 3rd MVP award come at the end. But you mentioned the rushing touchdown, hit the step back juke on it. That move he went viral for back in high school. Saw hilarious. No, I think Kevin someone interviewed the head coach from the other high school where that happened, basically, and they were talking to the head coach, and he was basically saying that game made him reevaluate if he should even be a football coach because of like what position he was putting his players in. But then he sees Lamar go off against Florida State a couple years later, and he's like, "Well, I'm not so bad." And now he's like, "I should be coaching in the NFL. I did a better job against this guy than these defenses are." So
I thought the nonchalant like sidestep of the sack, right up the middle was like just as impressive as that. Like he just, he's just so fluid. I mean, and he's just honestly, it's like you can't touch me. That's what it looks like. It's just so nonchalant, just kind of like, I'm on another level right now than where you're at. You're an NFL player. I'm an alien, as you like to say, Ian. If we get one quarterback to defend the earth against aliens, which are really just future humans that have traveled and then they've come back in time to tell us that, make sure that we don't like nuke our planet. But if we did have to play that football game against those little gray guys, I would definitely take Lamar Jackson at quarterback.
Man, the way he's playing, it is tough to disagree with you. So also love his, I believe, mostly newfound trend of holding the follow through on some of these touch passes that he's getting going downfield. Just, among the coolest players I think we have ever seen play the game. Yeah. Also, shout out Justice Hill, 51-yard touchdown run, continuing to really be the poster child for coming back from an Achilles injury and still being a grade A baller. Also, shout out Rashad Bateman, had a sweet 40-yard touchdown catch, and Mark Andrews, monster dude in the back of the end zone for a touchdown as well. And also shout out to John Harbaugh for having the gonads to go for it on 4th and 1 from his own 16-yard line before the half. Wound up getting his team an extra 7 points after they marched down the field. So good stuff there. Not so good stuff going on with the Chargers offense. Not really due to Justin Herbert, but goodness gracious, Dwayne, the amount of drop passes between Quentin Johnston and to a slightly lesser extent Josh Palmer, really did hate to see it. Passing game really was only consistently getting going through Ladd McConkey, who caught all 6 of his targets for 83 yards. Please, on behalf of every single fantasy manager and Charger fan out there, more Ladd McConkey. We deserve it at this point. Sadly, though, Dwayne, the main storyline here to talk about is J.K. Dobbins leaving early with a knee injury.
Yeah, Dobbins exited, and it was mostly the Gus Edwards show after that. Like, we're waiting to hear more information. Sounds like it could be an MCL sprain. It's not good no matter what, right? We know the injuries that Dobbins has battled through. Maybe he can play through this, but he's been playing so good, you just really hate to see it. So we'll see where the news lands up. But as of last night, it really was the Gus Edwards show after Dobbins left. Now you have to know, Kamani Vidal was not available for the game. He's been inactive since we've had Gus Edwards back. Hassan Haskins was also involved, Ian. But what's funny is, in a game where you lose J.K. Dobbins, this guy has the lowest rush attempt share he's had in like a month. Like, these things are just so, you would think this would be the game where, okay, we're going to get Haskins more involved, but no, it was mostly Gus Edwards. Now, Edwards did not look that good, but the Ravens are a really good run defense. They didn't have Roquan Smith last night. I was actually legit laughing at Malik Harrison. You talk about some running backs that just run into the back of their defenders. Did you see some of those plays where he's completely running to the wrong hole and like just running into the back of the defensive lineman? It was like a running back. Like, he didn't have the vision on the linebacker side of the ball. You can speak to that better than me, Hartitz, because you are the former college linebacker, after all, not me in this conversation. But it does look like it would probably be Gus Edwards on early downs. I do think Kamani Vidal would come in and take the passing down work. If I had to choose, if we suddenly found out that, and hopefully this doesn't happen, knock on wood, that Dobbins had to go on like 4-week IR, I think Gus Edwards obviously is the guy we would put the chip on to get the most work out of the gate. But I still think the guy that could have the most upside, that could change your fantasy season, would still be Vidal. So I think you just got to take that into account when you think about your roster. What are you looking for? Someone you've got to plug in, next week? Or are you looking for someone that you can stash on your roster? And if that turns into a long-term injury for Dobbins, he could eventually be the guy that could win you your fantasy league. I still think that's Vidal, but I'm not going to sit here and, pound the table and say it's absolutely going to be him. After all, they've left him inactive since we've seen Gus Edwards back.
When we did see Vidal active, though, they were willing to throw the football more to him, which is something obviously not really in Gus Edwards' toolkit. And Hassan Haskins, not exactly the most fleet-footed receiver out there as well. He's just there to, steal those 1-yard touchdowns once they do get down to the goal line, which is just a fantastic, scenario to have going on in Fantasyland. So we'll have more updates on J.K. Dobbins throughout the week. But yeah, for now, guys, just, get better soon. And Gus Edwards, waiver priority. More on that here in just a bit. But that, again, was our Monday Night Football recap. There was a lot of news though on Monday that I now am going to quickly go over. Starting with quarterback, Brock Purdy did do some light throwing on Monday. Apparently, everything went well. So hopefully, fingers crossed for all the involved fantasy parties, he is good to go for week 13 and beyond. Meanwhile, Cowboys quarterback Cooper Rush limited with a knee injury in the estimated injury report. That said, Mike McCarthy doesn't seem to think there's going to be an issue ahead of Thursday. Trevor Lawrence also did practice on Monday, and Doug Peterson said they will make a decision later in the week about his availability. Aiden O'Connell returned to practice as well, replacing Gardner Minshew, who is indeed guaranteed out for the season. Also, Daniel Jones cleared waivers as an unrestricted free agent. We're getting like 2012 LeBron level media hype on this now. The Raiders have been eliminated from contention all over Daniel freaking Jones, which is ridiculous. But apparently, per some of these, rumor streets out there on Twitter, 49ers and Vikings could be called the front runners. Also, per Jeff Ulbrich, no discussion about shutting down Aaron Rodgers at this point in time. We will see how that, continues to develop as the weeks go on. At running back, Lions RB David Montgomery, estimated DNP with that shoulder injury on Monday. So they're actually going to be practicing here on Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll see if he can get right in this short week ahead of Thanksgiving. Also estimated DNP, Lions wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown with a knee, and Romeo Dobbs with the Packers with that concussion. More on that Green Bay wide receiver room here in just a bit. Keep an eye on CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks, estimated limited practices. Maybe we do see Cooks get back in action. Otherwise, Cedric Tillman remains in concussion protocol. Josh Downs is week to week and quote unquote a long shot to play in week 13. And Giants head coach Brian Daboll admitted he has to get the ball in Malik Neighbors' hands earlier and more often. Noted a lot of frustration. Think we do see, the squeaky wheel gets the grease storyline here ahead of Thanksgiving. Over at tight end, Jake Ferguson, once again a long shot to play. Dontayvion Sanders did avoid serious injury per Dave Canales, which is good. Hayden Hurst on IR, more Will Dissly. Gotta love to see that. Broncos wave tight end Greg Dulcich. Hate to see that. And yeah, otherwise, guys, just two big defensive injuries with Eagles defensive end Brandon Graham with a torn left triceps out for the season, and Buccaneers safety Jordan Whitehead dealing with a pec, also out for the season. So that was the news, ladies and mostly gentlemen. And now a quick word to our friends over at Game Time. Shout out to Game Time because, Dwayne, we both know there's nothing like being at a live football game. The energy, the excitement, it just hits differently in person. And I will never, ever forget seeing the Ohio State University absolutely stomp Michigan in the big house in Harbaugh's first game against us back in 2015 while I was road tripping with my buddy following just the most depressing loss ever against Michigan State. So that was incredible. And accordingly, this year I am ready for more. And Game Time is my go-to for finding amazing tickets, not just for sports, but also for concerts and shows too. In fact, I was scrolling through the Game Time app the other day looking for concerts and shows for me and the wife, and I came across this new feature called Game Time Picks. Total game changer. It actually, guys, instead of wasting your time searching through a ton of tickets, Game Time Picks will curate your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats. I even saw this super deal for a Columbus Blue Jackets game, which shout out hockey, shout out Blue Jackets, amazing experience, and couldn't believe the price, so I bought those instead. Game Time makes this so easy. It is seriously a no-brainer, people. Again, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets, and you can download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LIFE, that's code LIFE, L-I-F-E, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, guys, create an account and redeem code LIFE for $20 off. Download Game Time today because what time is it? Game time. Sheesh is right, Dwayne. Welcome to the Sheesh Report, everybody, presented by our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade, where we go through some of the, near-miss tilting moments that simply left fantasy managers, anytime touchdown bettors, and fans alike saying sheesh. So no other moment really gets the sheesh veins, blood, whatever I'm trying to say going, Dwayne. Just like when players get tackled so close to the goal line, right at that 1 yard line spot, before unfortunately getting tackled and then not getting the chance to score a touchdown. Sadly, this happened more than once this week to Bucky Irving. Still had a great day out there, but back-to-back receptions, man, in the first half on different drives, wound up getting tackled just short of the goal line. So we saw Sean Tucker get his first chance to come in, scored the touchdown, got his second chance to come in and fumbled the ball away. Dwayne, didn't lead to an immediate benching there, but kind of wish it would because, hey, we can live with two running back backfields in 2024, three or more running backs. That's when things get a bit complicated.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil all the greatness around Bucky Irving. We're going to get to him in a minute in the utilization report. But yes, it was very frustrating because the big day that we saw could have been even bigger for Bucky Irving. And that will be part of the theme that we talk about, Ian, is can Bucky Irving continue to turn this part-time role, which is really looks more like a running back 3 or running back 2, into running back 1? Goodness, but more on that in just a minute.
Other players tackled at the 1 yard line: Chuba Hubbard, Roshan Johnson, Zach Charbonnet, mentioned the Sean Tucker fumble. Aaron Jones also lost a fumble, could have had a 2-touchdown day for himself. At least he did finally get in there eventually. Trey Tucker, Tucker Kraft, Johnny Munt, and Tommy DeVito. Finally, didn't see Saquon on this list, which is cool. But just speaking of Saquon, guys, 286 PPR points through 11 games. That is ridiculous. And it's actually the 16th best start to a season by a running back in NFL history. If you do say, let's say the Eagles did not tush push, okay, and we look at the 9 different times that Saquon's been stopped in the 1 yard line over the course of 8 different drives, give him those 8 touchdowns because Saquon's awesome. He would have the 4th best start to a season in NFL history by a running back. Only 2002 Priest Holmes, 2006 LaDainian Tomlinson, and 2019 CMC would be better. Talk about a sheesh. Also, sheeshy occurrences, Dwayne, happen when a player scores a touchdown, only for those pesky zebras to throw their flag and nullify the thing, taking those points off the board. Had 4 of them last week. Justin Jefferson from 40 yards out on an OPI play where, yes, Brandon Powell did a bad job of kind of setting that pick. It should have come off the board. Also, Michael Wilson from 7 yards out had a holding call on, Paris Johnson, their left tackle. And as we mentioned on Monday night, Derrick Henry from 5 yards out. But I thought the notable one here was Nico Collins, Dwayne, because for the second week in a row, had a long touchdown taken off the board. This one, 33 yards. And yes, it was illegal, shift. We had Joe Mixon and Tank Dell moving at the same time before the snap, but didn't really impact the play, similarly to the 77-yard house call against the Cowboys. So, Dwayne, if again, we happen to live in a world where that Texans offensive lineman was 1 yard shorter against the Cowboys and Joe Mixon just didn't freaking move in this past game, Nico Collins would be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy since returning from injury. And accordingly, guess where we have him ranked ahead of the Jaguars game?
Yeah, he's going to be the wide receiver 1 this week. He still gave you 20.2 fantasy points last week, despite, basically pulling, what was that, a 10-point play off the board, Ian? Would have been closer to 30 points. So Ooh. Nico, he got a larger workload last week. The first week, 55% route participation coming off the hamstring injury. They ramped that up to 80% this last week. I think this weekend, you will see him closer to that 95% route participation. Dude has a 30% targets per route run over the last 2 games. We've talked about Tank Dell multiple times, just not really living up to the Tank Dell hype that we saw from last year, right? Tank Dell was a great player last year, lesser version of that for whatever reason this season. And that just really means that this offense has an opportunity to even condense more around Nico Collins. So yeah, we absolutely love Nico. I think he's a top 3 wide receiver the rest of the way, and he will be my wide receiver 1 in the ranks, right next to you, Hartitz. I know you'll be there too this weekend against the Jaguars.
You and me both, brother. But guys, that wraps up our big, breakdown of the Sheesh Report. But I invite you to check out the full article over at FantasyLife.com. Looked at Anthony Richardson's performance actually being quite a bit better than the box score indicated. I go through every single interception to assign some blame and just note out when quarterbacks probably shouldn't be overly criticized for them. Drop touchdowns, defensive pass interference yards, and so much more. So again, check that out over at FantasyLife.com. And also be sure to check out Mike's Hard Lemonade, guys, because fantasy football playoffs are around the corner. And while that may be cause for celebration for some, that also means there are hard days to come. So hey, Mike's Hard Lemonade wants to remind you that hard days do indeed deserve a hard lemonade. It doesn't matter if you're a playoff lock fighting for that final spot or if your season was over the minute you made pick 101. You worked hard all season long, so quench your hard-earned thirst with a Mike's Hard Lemonade. All right, Dwayne, week 12 in the rear view mirror now, and accordingly, let's get into our utilization report presented by DraftKings, kicking things off with your upgrades, starting things off with the man we mentioned a few short minutes ago, Bucky Irving, a low-end RB2 for you moving forward.
Yeah, and I didn't necessarily anticipate writing up this many words around Bucky Irving in the utilization report this weekend. You and I talked about him on Sunday night in the recap show. If you guys haven't seen those, you should be checking them out. Great listen on the Monday drive to work. Be able to listen to that and you get everything about the weekend that happened. But when we talked about it on that show, I was a little lower on Bucky Irving, but I hadn't had a chance to fully dig into the data. So if you look at his last 4 weeks, right, he's got a 6.9 utilization score. He's scoring over 16 fantasy points per game. His comp group says he should be more around 13.6 based on using that utilization score, which is more predictive than fantasy points, guys. I know that sounds like it should be common sense if you're going to talk about something, but it's really hard to create a measure metric that actually is better than fantasy points at predicting future fantasy points. So always keep that in mind when you're looking at new metrics. That's a quick question you should ask yourself. But when we look at this role coming out of the bye, it actually got even better, Ian. So that's the one thing. Anytime coming out of the bye, we don't know for sure, but we want to pay a little bit of extra attention. And he took over the 2-minute offense. You mentioned those 2 near touchdowns. They were on receptions. He had a season high in route participation this weekend in games without Rachaad White. We had one game earlier in the year where he had more snaps than this. He had more routes, but it was a game where Rachaad White didn't play. So for being in a completely healthy backfield, this was his best utilization game of the season. And so I did look at the last 4 weeks to kind of create the comp group, which does include, and it allows this more recent week to be weighted more than if we just looked at it across the whole season. And at first I'm like, okay, like his comps have averaged lower than he has. So I'm probably thinking that this should be a regression candidate. But as I dug into it, I was like, man, he might actually do this, Ian, because here's the thing. We've seen 9% of these running backs actually finish in the top 6. So you already know there's these outlier cases that have gone on to have really good production, even though the role isn't like an A+ role. But then if you look at running back 7 to 13, that's 13%. So we've got over 20% finishing as running back 1s. And then if you look at that mid-range running back 2 range, 13 to 18, 17%. So you're looking at roughly 40% of the time, you've got a mid-range running back 2 or better. I like those chances, especially when the big thing you brought up to me on Sunday night when we were talking is, man, look at this freaking schedule. So we got a guy coming out of the bye that potentially has got a better role. He's been hyper efficient, ranks 4th in rushing yards per carry, and guys with at least 75 carries. And now look at these games, and I used our DVP tool, which actually tells you how good the defense is or how bad the defense is based on the opponents they've played, which really adjusts things. Man, they've got the best lineup here down the stretch for, honestly, receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, you name it. The Bucs are going to win some people fantasy championships. I think Bucky Irving is going to be part of it. But if you look at the Panthers, they play them twice, Ian. That's the best matchup in fantasy for running backs. Play the Raiders. That's the 8th best matchup for running backs in the league. You get the Cowboys on there, ranked 11th. I think you and I would both agree that's using part of the early season stuff. Over the last few weeks, the Cowboys are probably, I would say they're probably the 3rd or 4th best matchup you can have for a running back. I know it didn't work out last week with Brian Robinson getting hurt, but still, these are all 4 games where I think that they're favorites. They've got one tougher matchup against the Chargers, but I mean, 4 out of 5 games, I really do like Bucky Irving's chances. So I did upgrade him to a low-end running back 2, but he legit carries running back 1 upside the rest of the way. I thought you asked the question perfectly on the Sunday night recap. You said, great, Dwayne, but would we take a guy in a lesser role given the way that the Bucs are going to be playing, trying to make the playoffs versus some of these other guys that we know have better roles but have not been performing well, and maybe their teams are more in like tank mode? And I think the answer is yes, you would prefer Bucky in those situations.
And that's before even the factor that this dude is freaking sweet of football, Dwayne. RB8 and rushing yards over expected per carry. Right now, it's Bucky and Kenneth Walker as the top 2 running backs in the NFL in terms of forcing missed tackles per carry. Truly 2 of the most fun running backs to watch on any given Sunday. So gotta love us some Bucky Irving. Same thing, Dwayne, though, with Jordan Addison, who don't look now has been the wide receiver 7 during the past 4 weeks, even with TJ Hawkinson returning.
I finally gave up on the Jordan Addison over props, which I was teasing up. And I literally stopped them 2 weeks ago, and he's hit it 2 weeks in a row. And so you know how it goes. But look, we were right. The process was right. I just didn't follow it long enough. But here's the interesting part about what's happening with the Vikings. It's really looking at Sam Darnold, Ian, and we talked about this on Sunday night as well. But look, they finally played 2 pretty good defenses. Coming out of their bye week, they had a lot of winnable matchups. And Sam Darnold was good in those. He wasn't necessarily great the whole time, but he was fine for you in fantasy. You know, he had a QB1 over that stretch. We looked at the next 2 games that were going to be the Tennessee Titans and the Chicago Bears. We were like, okay, time to tap the brakes. But something really interesting happened in these 2 games. You finally played these 2 tougher defenses. And guess what Sam Darnold did? He really evolved to start using his other weapons, one of them being Jordan Addison. And he had 2 of his best outings of the season. Sam Darnold put up 25.6 and 21.1 fantasy points against these 2 tougher defenses. So now you've kind of seen this forced evolution. And there's this saying in the NFL, right? It's kind of this old adage that, look, if you have 1 good wide receiver, you can beat bad and averages defenses. If you have 2 good good receiving options, you can beat good defenses. If you have 3 options, that can really stress any defenses, even the best ones. And that's what we've seen over these last couple of weeks. So I think this increases the ceiling for the Vikings passing offense on a weekly basis, period. I think we can be more confident at moving forward, and it doesn't just have to be matchup based. It's just a good offense overall. But yes, Jordan Addison has been absolutely freaking dominant. And this matches what you and I have talked about it many times on film. If there's one player that hasn't matched their production this year, there's a few, but Jordan Addison is definitely one of them. Every time you flip on the film, guys, and you just go watch him, you're just going to see him getting open. He doesn't always get the targets, but the dude can beat pretty much any corner in the league. You can press him and jam him up at times, but man, once he gets off that line of scrimmage, Ian, you know he's a guy that can win short and take a big play. He can hit you on the deep crossers. He can beat you over the top. So he's got a very versatile game. You just play next to Justin Jefferson, who in easy matchups, they just weren't forced to go away from, Ian. So I think that this is an eye-opener for Sam Darnold. I will say, if you look at the comps for Jordan Addison, even if you're looking like the last 4 games, and then also you have to take into account his season. You can't just forget it. So the way I built out his comp group, he's still a borderline running back 3, or you could call it a boom bust wide receiver 4, either one of those things. But 39% of the time, his comps based on his utilization score have finished as a wide receiver 3. So that's wide receiver 25 to 36. And 39% of the time they finish wide receiver 37 to 48 on the season. So he's right there in that range. He could be a wide receiver 3, more of a wide receiver 4, but he also gives you this big spike week upside. Going to be tough to pick which weeks to get him into your lineup. So probably more of a DFS guy than a rest of the season kind of play. But I don't know. Maybe the secret is whenever we actually have tough matchups, that's when you want to go to Jordan Addison, because we know defenses that are good enough to take away Justin Jefferson help force the hand of Sam Darnold.
I mean, at a minimum, man, we're definitely seeing more of a 1A, 1B, 1C situation than Justin Jefferson and everyone else over these past 4 weeks with Hawkinson back in the lineup. Jetta's still leading the team in targets with 31 and air yards with 342. Right behind him, though, with 27 and 331 air yards is Jordan Addison. Hawk at 25 and 221, not too far behind as well. So, yeah, we want full-time players and really good offenses who ideally are also really good players themselves, and that certainly does match Mr. Jordan Addison. Let's talk about another wide receiver, Dwain, who is just balling out recently, and that is Bo Nix's wide receiver 1, Courtland Sutton, who, don't look now, man, but since that infamous goose egg on Thursday Night Football, has scored more PPR points than any wide receiver not named Jamar Chase. That's pretty good, Dwain.
Yeah, also has a higher utilization score other than any receiver not named Jamar Chase. He's at a 9.7 over that stretch. Chase is at a 9.8. Remember, guys, the scale is 0 to 10. The best score you can get is a 10. He's setting at a 9.7 over these last 5 games. Now, it's not realistic to think that he's going to hold on to that 9.7, just like we wouldn't expect him to continue scoring. You know, when you see a guy go on like a 25 point per game run, you don't expect him to keep scoring 25 points per game for the season. The utilization report is similar in that way, but again, more predictive than fantasy points. And so if you look at Courtland Sutton, 21.2 fantasy points per game over this recent stretch. But if you look at the underlying data, it has been great, Ian. I mean, he's dominated targets over that 5-game stretch, 29%, air yards, 45%, end zone targets, 36%. And the other thing is, as you look at this graphic, which you guys can go look at any team you want, any combination of players you want, right? And just want to compare them, you can use the comparison tool over in the utilization suite at FantasyLife.com. But if you look at this, there's just not a lot of target competition here. We're going to get to the rookie Devon Villay here in just a little bit whenever we talk about some waiver wire options, but we don't have anyone else stepping up and truly challenging Courtland Sutton for the lead on the team. And then the other thing we've got is really the evolution of Bo Nix. And so when I created his comp group for the rest of the season, I didn't just use this last 5 games, but I did weight it a little bit more versus his season, because really we've seen Nick step forward in a big way with his play versus what we saw early in the year. And so when we look at the comps for Courtland Sutton the rest of the way, wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 12 finish, 33% of the time. So 1/3 of the time, you've got a wide receiver 1 moving forward with Courtland Sutton. If you got a wide receiver 2, 48% of the time. So almost half the time a wide receiver 2, or you're better than that another 33% of the time. And then we've got 18% of the time a wide receiver 3. So I think most likely, Ian, you're looking at a wide receiver 2. I have moved him into the mid-range wide receiver 2 conversation. Last week, we had him as a borderline wide receiver 1. We're going to have 6 teams back from bye, so it'll be a little bit harder to push push Courtland Sutton above some of these other names. But I'll ask you this, Ian, like, would you rather have Courtland Sutton the rest of the way or CeeDee Lamb? When I was starting to have my first pass through thinking about the rankings a little bit this week, like that was kind of the range where I was like, that's a really close call for me. Courtland Sutton versus CeeDee Lamb with Cooper Rush.
Man, this is close. Probably Sutton. I don't think the volume's that different, man.
It's not. And it's a better quarterback. Right?
Rush. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, man. Over this stretch, again, 48 targets, 6th most in the NFL, behind CeeDee, Kelsey, Chase, Kupp, and Puka, but the 2nd most air yards. And yeah, really at this point, no debate between Rush and Nix. Nix during the same stretch, QB 12 in terms of EPA per dropback and completion percentage over expected. Good time to have one of these dudes for the Broncos in fantasy. Let's close things out, Dwayne, with a pretty good tight end. He's been, scoring more points than any of them here recently. In fact, since returning from the bye, Jonnu Smith is the overall tight end 1 in fantasy football. Talk about apparently the number 2 pass game option in Miami.
And he's a great example of why we want to pay close attention to things happening out of the bye. It doesn't mean these trends always stick, but this goes back to the comments we were just talking about with Bucky Irving taking over the 2-minute offense coming out of the bye. Like, that could be a real thing. And this is exactly what happened with Jonnu Smith. Out of that bye week, we saw an increase in route utilization and route participation, and that has held. Since that week 5 bye, he's at a 76%, not quite at the 80%, which is kind of that high end, that tight end 1 threshold we're looking for. But he's right there. He's in a good offense. 2 is absolutely balling since getting back into the lineup. But over that time frame, Ian, averaging 16.3 fantasy points per game. And we've got some games with Tyler Huntley still at quarterback in that sample. Those are not all just games with Tua. And since week 6, he has an 8.7 utilization score. So no Dolphins receiver, period. No Dolphins player has been targeted more than Mr. Jonnu Smith over that stretch at 22%. Now, we've still got a diverse offense, right? You're still going to get targets to Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle, we saw last week, can pop up and still have a big game, so he's in the mix. And then we've also got Devon Achane. So it's not like it's going to be something where Jonnu Smith is the leading target earner for this team the rest of the way. But the point is, he's in the mix on a weekly basis, and we've always seen Jonnu as a guy that can add after the catch when he's been given his opportunities. I know last year that was a big theme for you, Ian. We're like, hey, we're all talking about Kyle Pitts, and we're griping about how we want to see him more, but man, Jonnu just keeps balling out with every opportunity he gets, so why would Arthur Smith stop giving him the ball? We've got a similar situation going on here, and it's not just the little dink and dunk stuff, man. He's turning these plays into, he's adding yak, he's making bigger plays down the field. Tua seems to really be comfortable with him. And I know the big thing is, but we're heading into December. We're heading into the cold months, with the Dolphins. And that seems to be the narrative that will take grip right over fantasy land, because then it's like, okay, we got to calm down about all these Dolphins players. But I'm going to say, do we? We do get the Packers this week, which right now, that's a Thursday night game. It's projected to be in like the 20-degree range. So that's going to be a cold one. So I can't deny that one. Probably have to downgrade the Dolphins offense. I'm not always into these things, but look, it's just too long of a trend for the Dolphins with Tua at quarterback. So downgrade this week. But after that, man, it's home versus the Jets, who you've talked about. The Jets defense, Ian, I think you would say it's a fugazi at this point. You look at the Texans. That's a dome game. All right, we're going to have great conditions there. You play the 49ers, whose defense is not really playing that well. That's at home, okay? And then you play the Browns, and that game could be cold, but we don't know if it's going to be cold or not. We don't know if it'll be windy or not. So at least 3 out of the next 5 games are going to be in good conditions for the Dolphins, and potentially it could be 4 out of 5. Like that game against the Browns might not be that cold. So I wouldn't worry too much about the weather. I think you have to have Jonnu Smith in that near must-start territory right now. He's a mid-range tight end 1 the rest of the way.
And even if the Browns game does turn into a complete Cleveland, mess, okay, that's in your fantasy championship. Let's get there, Dwayne, and then we can start worrying about if we need to, have someone else. So let's get there. But hey, shout out to Tua on the Dolphins, man. Since he has come back, number 1 QB in EPA per dropback, and this offense, man, is just humming. 27 points, 27, 23, and then back-to-back 34-point efforts along the way. So really good stuff there. And accordingly, we want all of the Miami Dolphins we can get in fantasy land. So more utilization goodness on the way, guys. But first, I want to give a shout out to our friends over at DraftKings. The days of waiting in lines at midnight to get the best Black Friday deals are over. Now, all you have to do is check out our partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook, who have touchdowns on sale all weekend long. Now, that is something to get excited about. Did you think that was it? Well, right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using my promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Again, guys, check out DraftKings Sportsbook app all weekend long to stay up to date on all of the touchdown offers available. And don't forget to stay in on the action and use your $150 in bonus bets on DraftKings same-game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout. Combine multiple bets together from the same game. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, Dwayne went through the upgrades, and now we're going to go through some risers. And as much as we love the good things in life and with utilization, sometimes it doesn't go so great. But one more good one before we get there, and that is Cowboys running back Rico Dowdle, who really has been taking over this backfield in recent weeks.
Yeah, and for this portion, really what we're looking at is we're looking at the last 4 games. How much has this player's utilization score moved up? And we look at the top movers, for each position. And Rico Dowdle is up 0.7 in his utilization score over the last 4 games. Ian, he's moved to a 7.3 utilization score since week 9. He's had 12.8 attempts and 4.3 targets per game over that stretch. So whenever you're getting 17 opportunities per game, even if you're an offense we don't love like the Cowboys, man, it's just really hard to completely bust in fantasy land. In fact, if we look at Dowdle's comps going back over the last 4 years, 58% of them finished as a running back 2, and then we had another 21% as high-end running back 3. So you could say 79% of the time it works all the time or something like that. So I did upgrade Dowdle to a high-end running back 3 territory just because he's getting so many opportunities. And remember, guys, utilization score doesn't just account for their role. We are also accounting for the player's talent, for their team environment, because fantasy points themselves are 20% approximately of the model. It's a little bit different for the different positions. So we are accounting for the fact that he's not playing on an offense that we really love right now, and he still comes out where he does in that comp range. So yes, Rico Dowdle, that's a nice little upgrade. A guy where we were looking at him as more like, man, low-end running back 3 for a decent amount of time. Over these last 4 games, he does have 60% of the rushing attempts and looking pretty strong.
Really nice schedule moving forward. I mean, at this point, Dwayne, the Cowboys season playoff hopes are obviously over, but it will be very Cowboys to kind of mess up their chances of getting a high draft pick over these next handful of weeks. Giants, Bengals, Panthers, Buccaneers, and then a pair of NFC matchups against the Eagles and Commanders to close things out. But man, especially those next 4 games, man, Rico getting 15 to 20 touches. Sign me up for that. That said, Dwayne, do not sign me up for any Denver Bronco running back, particularly not Javonte Williams, who seemed like he lost the backfield. Then it seemed like he got it back. And now it just seems like one big mess.
It is one big mess. His utilization score has fallen 0.6 points. Now, guys, when we talk about these earlier in the season, you see bigger movers, but as you've got more games on record, it's harder and harder. Just like, back in school, some of you guys, you might have had a really good grade. We could look at it that way, and it was hard for you to really hurt it. Or maybe you didn't have such a good GPA, and if you're trying to scramble it again at the end and make it a lot better, it becomes a lot harder to move. But down 0.6, that is significant, and it's just what you talked about, Ian. It's turned into a full-on 3-way committee. Javonte's still leading the team in snaps throughout the last 4 games, rushing attempts throughout the last 4 games, but we just don't have any of those games now mixing in where we're like, oh, he had 55 or 60% of the rushing attempts. That's not happening anymore. He's been more around that 30% mark. Over the last 4 games, 32% of the team's carries. So last week, it was Jaleel McLaughlin getting more involved, not Audric Estime, but Audric Estime was still out there. So a 3-headed committee. We have also seen Sean Payton very, very comfortable running this type of backfield in the past whenever he doesn't have a guy that he feels like he needs to feed. And that's kind of where I feel like they've settled. And it's kind of a shame because the Broncos are one of these surprise teams where we actually feel really good about what they're doing as an offense, but it's hard to get on board with any of their running backs when their snap share, the best players at a 49% over the last 3-week stretch. So really a situation we want to avoid. I want to keep them rostered if I can, because if somehow one of these guys, not that we're looking for this, but one of them were eliminated from the picture, right? One of them, like you like to say, Ian, one of them win the lottery, right? They win the Powerball, and win $750 million. Like, I don't need to listen to Sean Payton anymore. If you get this thing ever condensed down to 2, then I think it could be something we could get a little bit more excited about, because we do like the Broncos. But for now, only stash candidates, got to be on your bench.
It's 3, and honestly, you could argue a half, Dwayne, because they do have Marvin Mims now. He's played at least 5 snaps in the backfield in each of the last 3 games, and I do feel like when they want to throw the ball to a running back, at least a couple of those targets, of the designed quality, are now going to Marvin Mims. So, hey, working out for the Broncos in real life, just not so much in fantasy land. Talk about a riser, though, and he is a Chicago Bears wide receiver, an offense we've been able to trust a bit more here in recent weeks, Dwayne. Talk about Keenan Allen, who don't look now, 23 total targets over the last 2 weeks, third most in the NFL behind only Brock Bowers and CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, look, and I get it. A lot of people want to talk about these targets for these underneath players, right, as scam targets. It's Keenan Allen, Wan'Dale Robinson, Adam Thielen. Oh, wait, who else? Jackson Smith and Jigba, guys. Add him to the conversation. He's playing the same role. We like him. We're not saying we don't like him. The point being, we can't control where these players play. All we know is, are they playing well in the role they're given? And does that historically matter for fantasy football? And the answer is yes. These kind of roles can be productive. So the big issue here is the Bears offense, right? I think if we looked at Keenan Allen and he had a better quarterback that was consistent, not saying Caleb Williams can't come through with the big booms, because we saw it this last weekend, but we also have more duds from Caleb Williams than any other quarterback in the NFL that we drafted this year in fantasy. There have been massive duds from this guy, and that's a big factor. But to your point, Ian, like if we look at this, since the week 7 bye, and remember, Keenan got hurt in the preseason. He had the heel injury. He re-aggravated that in week 1. He missed a little time, but if we look at it over this stretch, and you guys can see it all here on the screen, thanks, hat tip to producer Swing putting these graphics together. 29% target share over that stretch, air yard share 36% of the end zone targets, 43% of the end zone targets and 36% of the air yards. So he's leading the team in targets, and he's tied with Rome Odunze for air yards as well as the end zone targets. So he is getting plenty of work, Ian. We just need Caleb Williams to be more consistent. And I'll be honest, I think if Caleb Williams was being more consistent, the narrative that fat Keenan Allen is the problem, it would be gone. I don't think there's anything really less about Keenan Allen this year than what we saw last year. Whatever issues you had with him last year, they're here this year. The issue is the quarterback play. If we saw Keenan Allen playing with Justin Herbert right now, and the Chargers were still passing the ball a lot, I think you would be getting similar numbers to last year's Keenan. The problem is that's not the case. We really need Caleb Williams to step up here. But Keenan Allen, he does upgrade to that borderline wide receiver 3 territory. It's kind of a shame. Like, honestly, a player getting this many targets should be locked into our wide receiver 2 conversation. But the reality is the Bears are a roller coaster ride. It's very hard to predict which Caleb you're going to get week to week.
End of season schedule. A couple of weeks ago, Dwayne, we'd say, oh my God, this looks horrible. But now with some of the injuries going on, man, Lions, 49ers, Vikings, Lions, Seahawks, the rest of the way. Not a complete smash spot after smash spot or anything like that, but that's reasonable, man. Particularly to your, especially if Caleb keeps improving, to your main point. And all of a sudden, the world's best wide receiver trio, as we were told going into the year, maybe at least helping us out, towards the end of the season. Finally, though, Dwayne, it's getting me mad. I'm not gonna lie. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver faller. Yes, the man's a baller because he continues to make big plays, but Commanders targets over the last 4 weeks, everyone. Number 1, Noah Brown, 27. Okay, must just be a 4-week thing. Terry's got to be next. No. Okay, Zach Ertz is at 24. Okay. Oh, come on now. Okay, Terry's for sure number 3. No, Austin Eckler at 18, and then Terry freaking McLaurin all the way down there at number 4 on his own team, Dwayne. What is going on?
Yeah, look, this is one that, I nearly didn't include because I'm honestly not that worried about it. But the data is the data, right? And we want to talk people through what these things mean. He is down 0.7 points in the utilization score over the last 4 weeks. Last 4 weeks, he's got a 5.6 utilization score. That's pulled his season mark down to 7.1. But But a lot of this has coincided, Ian, with Jaden Daniels and the chest injury. You know, we talked about it this last weekend on the Sunday night show. Does look like he's starting to move around a little bit more, using him a little bit more on the design run game, not immediately going to a slide posture, you know, as soon as he leaves the pocket. So I think as Jaden gets a little more healthy, we probably see more back from Terry McLaurin. Now, I mean, it's also, you got to account for the fact that he shouldn't have had an 86-yard touchdown against the freaking Cowboys. Like, that play shouldn't even be in there, which is helping him because that was a target. Those were air yards. Those were fantasy points, which all factor into that utilization score. So the score should honestly be down even a little more than it is. That 86-yard touchdown reception helped him out a little bit, but I'm still just not going to worry about it too much, Ian. The other thing we know is typically these teams are focusing on the last 4 weeks of film. Who had been balling out for Terry McLaurin over the first part of the year, and teams started deciding to try to probably take him away and see if other guys can beat them. So far, though, Zach Ertz, Noah Brown, they're getting their targets, but they've not shown they can truly beat the other defenses. So this could linger a little bit, but I mostly think that once Jaden Daniels is fully back to health, and, you know, come on, man, Kingsbury, can we move the guy around? Are we back to this static crap where we just put your wide receiver to the left? I mean, I don't understand it. So the scheme is worrying me a little bit, but I tend to trust Jaden Daniels is kind of my stance on McLaurin, Ian. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. I did downgrade him from mid-range wide receiver 2, but only to low-end wide receiver 2. I didn't want to make a big move here for McLaurin. Look, even guys at that range, if you look at his season-long utilization score, Ian, so we're counting all this against him. Okay, 64% of them have been a low-end wide receiver 2 or better. So his comps are still pretty good for a wide receiver 2 finish.
To Dwayne's point, 77% of McLaurin's snaps this year have come as the left outside wide receiver, which again, he still made plenty of big plays there. I'm not saying you can't do that, but in an offense with so few other options to get the ball to, I mean, it's not like Luke McCaffrey. He's being used more. Dwayne, we don't hate Noah Brown. No. We don't hate Zach Ertz, but my God, can we get the ball in your dynamic playmakers' hands more often? We would appreciate it. So guys, again, those were our risers and fallers, but now it is time to get into that waiver wire. And Dwayne, there are a few decent names here that we do need to keep an eye on. Kicking things off with a personal favorite of yours, Packers wide receiver 4, but all of a sudden, due to a Romeo Dobbs concussion, maybe cracking that top 3, Dontayvion Wicks, Dwayne, available in 85% of leagues right now.
Yeah, Ian, who leads the Packers this year in targets per route run?
Who is last in yards per route run? Oh, Dontayvion Wicks.
Yeah. So gotcha. Here's what I'm going to say about that. No, you didn't. Yards per route run. How many routes does it take it to stabilize? About 350. Okay, targets per route run, about 150. So, Ian's wrong. Dwayne's right. No, I'm just kidding. Look, he has had the drops. He's had things that bring the yards per route down. What's funny is yards per route run was the big stat that everyone was touting this offseason for the reason he was the sleeper, because it was so high. So it's funny how these things cut both ways. So we're just having some fun here. But the bottom line is, like, he's earning the targets when he's been on the field. He just hasn't been on the field enough. It's an offense we like. It's Jordan Love. It's the Packers, one of the better offenses in the league. There's a lot of upside in this passing game. So if we get Dontayvion Wicks in a role where he's out there 70 to 80% of the time, Ian, we're going to like what that can bring for our fantasy lineups. I mean, he has wide receiver 1 upside. I know people are going to laugh at that, and you're probably get so sick of me talking about the process, but it's the reason we study these things, because they do help us in fantasy football. It doesn't mean they're foolproof, doesn't mean they work every single time, but if we are playing the percentages, Dontayvion Wicks, guys that have been like him in the past, Ian, they have typically come through for us. So I am in on Dontayvion Wicks. As far as fab and the way you treat him, I think you can only look at it as probably a 1 week. They play on Thursday. We're almost certain Dontayvion Wicks is going to be out there starting instead of Romeo Dobbs. But we're at crunch time, man. If you need a win this weekend and your wide receiver core is messed up, or you're a major underdog and you need upside, Wicks is one of the names that I want to target. I think he'll be in I haven't done my rankings yet. Like I said, started looking at them. He'll be a wide receiver 3 probably for me this week, Ian. Maybe low end because no team's on bye. But again, I do think he has wide receiver 1 boom upside, essentially like every Packers receiver. We don't really know which one's going off each week, and that includes Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. It's kind of rotated around.
At a minimum, a top 50 guy. But Dwayne, I love how Mike Tomlin likes to say the standard is the standard. Maybe our new saying needs to be the process is the process. So hopefully Wicks can finally come through on that. There is some talent in there. I'm not being a complete hater in these streets, but, just a little bit. Another wide receiver who honestly has a pretty similar profile. Not a ton of production, but man, some of the underlying stuff is pretty sweet. Colts wide receiver 3 these days with Josh Downs again week to week and not expecting to play this week. A.D. Mitchell, Dwayne, available in 94% of leagues still.
Yeah, so this is a really similar play to what we just talked about with Dontayvion Wicks, 27% targets per route run. That's second on the Colts behind Josh Downs. He is the guy that in the preseason and in games in the past when we haven't had Downs has got to play more in the slot. So I think he's going to be out there in 3 wide receiver sets. I think Alec Pierce probably gets the bump up, as the guy out there in the wide receiver 2 sets more consistently along with Michael Pittman. But we do have a playmaker, and to your point, Ian, great job by you yesterday putting it out there on Twitter, just showing all these plays with Anthony Richardson. Even though he completed 39% of his passes on Sunday, man, it could have been so much more. You had some drops, guys not getting both feet in bounds. You had multiple plays nullified by penalties. We really could have had a second consecutive big game from Anthony Richardson, but a lot of it was just a little bit unlucky. I would say a lot unlucky after watching your video on Twitter. So yeah, with this play, it's similar to what we have with Wicks. I think the one thing you have to ask yourself, I still think the Packers passing game has more upside, but I think there is a chance that Adonai Mitchell could be a multi-week play, whereas Dontayvion Wicks is probably a 1-week play. So it really does come down to what you're needing for your roster. You got to win this weekend. You want the most upside. I think it is Wicks. But if you're looking, hey, I've got a spot where I might need somebody for 3 weeks, I might not even have to play him this week, I do think I would lean Adonai Mitchell. Really close call between those two.
I believe Colts do have that pesky week 14 bye. But again, that Josh Downs shoulder injury, man, we know how these things go. One bad scan, maybe he's going to sadly miss more than just this next week or two. So got to love us some A.D. Mitchell, 4th in ESPN's open rating this year. So even if you're not a film grinder, got to be loving that. And got to be loving, Dwayne, a lot of snaps for a running back. Haven't seen one of these guys, popping up on the waiver wire in a while. Amir Abdullah, we don't love the offense, but we do love the usage, Dwayne.
Yeah, look, he had an 8.5 utilization score last week. We've got a Friday game here. It is against the Chiefs, so not ideal, Ian. That's the worst matchup for running backs. But when we look at Abdullah, he had 89% of the snaps last weekend. He gave you 17.5 fantasy points. So it was Sincere McCormick, not Dylan Laube coming in as the running back 2. So you got to think that in that game, they're going to trail. It is probably going to be mostly Amir Abdullah. He's getting all the passing down work. So he could scratch out 12, 13 fantasy points for you in a PPR if you're really hurting. Again, got to keep an eye on this. Will Zamir White and Alexander Madison miss the game again? Could get one of them back. If that does happen, that kind of changes the calculations here for how we'll feel about Amir Abdullah.
More RB injuries opening up newfound opportunities in Washington. Brian Robinson obviously left last week early with an ankle. We'll see if he's back for this week, but almost certainly will not have Austin Eckler after that scary late game concussion. Seemingly setting the table, Dwayne, for one, Jeremy McNichols, 99% available. You do not see that, in week 13 too often.
Yeah, not a lot to add here because we don't have a lot of data on Jeremy McNichols, and we especially don't have any data on him in a game where we don't have Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler, but we can look at a depth chart. And there's not much available, Ian. So it's pretty likely that it's going to be the Jeremy McNichols show. He's done some nice things with his touches. He's shown in the past to be a guy that can operate on passing down. So you kind of got to look more at his body of work, which still isn't huge, but he does have potential 3-down ability. So I think if we've got a situation where both guys are out, you would be looking at a borderline running back 2 with McNichols, and he could surprise us and give us more, especially if Jaden Daniels continues to get healthier, and that opens up things for the Commanders offense.
Again, going to be one of the bigger injury situations to watch throughout the week. They probably will re-sign Chris Rodriguez or someone else to add some depth, but even if they do that, Jerry McNichols is the guy that we will be putting our chip on. Similarly, Dwayne, if we had to pick a Broncos wide receiver not named Cortland Sutton, sure looking like Devon Vele is that guy, pal.
Yeah, 21% targets per route run. So that's a really good mark, especially for a rookie wide receiver drafted in round 7. He is the wide receiver 2 right now for the Broncos. Not getting all the routes we would want, sitting right at 74% over the last 3 games. So we'd like that number to be closer to 85-90% for a wide receiver too. But hey, we can't be, beggars can't be choosers. If you're working the waiver wire right now, you're trying to find someone that might have some upside for your stretch run. If teams start to lock down Cortland Sutton, and we still believe in Bo Nix, right now, Devon Vele would be the guy most likely to benefit in that scenario, Ian. So I did move him into low-end wide receiver for territory.
Popped off the screen a little bit when I was watching some film yesterday too. Not saying he's going to be the next wide receiver one in the world, but had some crafty routes out there and even got the Marquise Colston comp out of Sean Payton, who, let's face it, maybe could update his Rolodex of comps a little bit. I feel like we've had a lot of Colstons over the years and he was a great player. But yeah, Devon Vele, 95% available. Gotta love that. Someone who is not 99% available, maybe they aren't available in your league, pal, but hey, maybe they are, Dwayne. Jaylen Warren, Steelers RB2, but been healthier lately and accordingly seeing better usage than he did during the first month of the season.
Yeah, definitely not available in the leagues that you and I play in, pal. But hey, we like to live vicariously through others. He is available like almost 40% of the time, right around 40%. So he's up 0.7 in his utilization score. So he was also one of the big risers after Rico Dowdle. He's averaging 12 fantasy points, got a 5.9 utilization score over the last 4 weeks. Najee Harris remains the primary ball carrier, Ian, but Jaylen Warren's working in there. He's getting around 30% of the carries over that stretch, 31%. He's getting the 2-minute snaps right at 67% in that role. So that's led to more opportunities in the passing game. Now, Russ doesn't check the ball down a ton to the backs, but he has done it here a little bit recently. But the main thing is you just add it all up. You've got 10.5 rushing attempts and 3.3 targets per game. So if you've got a guy with a skill set like Jaylen Warren getting somewhere between 13 and 15 opportunities per game, that's going to make them a running back 3, and they could give you running back 2 performances. So yeah, looking at Jaylen Warren does get an upgrade. If you're hurting at the position, maybe you have J.K. Dobbins on your roster, you don't get Gus Edwards, something like that. Honestly, I think I'd be looking at Jaylen Warren just as much as Gus Edwards. I mean, I think they're pretty close, even though Gus Edwards might get more work. So Jaylen Warren, just a name for you. If he does happen to be available in your league, definitely showing some things over the last month of football.
And finally, a stash play, because as much as week 12 was a buy-mageddon occurrence, we're going to see the same thing in week 14, with quarterback probably getting hit the hardest. Lamar Jackson, Bo Nix, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels all on bye, leading us, Dwayne, to the unlikely hero potentially, Will Levis, still available in 88% of leagues.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing with Levis is we just got to look at these last 2 games. He has shown us a newfound ceiling, at least for this year. We saw this a little bit last year as far as his passing yards per game. I mean, he threw for 295 in week 11 and a touchdown. And then last weekend, he threw for 278 and 2 touchdowns. So if we look at him over the last 3 games since coming back from injury, he's got 20 rushing attempts for 69 yards. So they are utilizing him more on the ground. He's scrambling more. He's got 20% of their design rushing attempts. That's an astronomical number, guys. That's in Jalen Hurts territory. We're not saying he's the same thing, but he's eventually going to punch in a rushing touchdown if they let him run that much. So there's some sneaky things to like here about Levis. So yes, if you are facing the quarterback challenge on Buy-Mageddon number 2 in week 14, I think Will Levis is the stash play now if you can afford to go ahead and just throw him on the end of your roster and let him sit on the bench.
You didn't even mention the best part, Dwayne. Jaguars in week 14, dead last in QB. You're good. Dead last in fantasy points per game allowed to QBs, and seemingly, kind of quitting on the season. That is a combo we can all get behind. So gotta love that, and gotta love you for checking us out again. Appreciate it, and we will be back for more tomorrow. Myself and Chris Allen before Dwayne is back in the house with Matthew Friedman on Thursday. So happy Turkey Week again, guys. Get those fantasy lineups right, and we'll see you soon. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.